if you guys thought I was gonna leave you hanging for the top 10 picks of the year, then you don't know me. So I'm trying to think of something to say that will kind of summarize this year of reading and of life for me, and I'm having a hard time just putting it all into words. Basically, the year was a good year of reading for me. A lot of you guys know my mom died this year in May, and I think that definitely obviously affected all areas of my life, but even my reading a little bit, I think maybe I became a more empathetic reader. I think I became a more empathetic person, just period. But I think it made what reading is to me even more obvious. Words just proved as powerful as I think they could have. And I feel like every year, more and more, I become more delusional about reading and what it means to me. And I feel like on this almost completely metaphysical level that it contains some sort of certifiable magic. I have my top 10 books of the year, guys. I did rank them as I do every year. I feel like this list can most accurately be put into terms of bottom half, top half, but I did rank them like by the number. So just take everything with a grain of salt. All of these books were so good. All of these have a special place in my heart. All of them have a special place in the universe. Another slight disclaimer, I did finish Lord of the Rings this year. And I'm kicking it off this list, not because it wasn't probably one of the best books ever, but because it was already in my top 10 last year. I basically read all of the Lord of the Rings quartet, which I'm including The Hobbit, at like end of last year, beginning of this year. And I kind of already gloated about it in my other top 10 videos, so I feel like it was redundant for me to once again like put on Return of the King on here. I am kind of lazily clumping them all together, and so maybe that is a little bit lazy of me instead of individually ranking each of the books. So let's just get right into the juice of things. My number 10 read of 2023 goes to A High Wind in Jamaica by Richard Hughes. Jamaica remained and blossomed anew, its womb being inexhaustible. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton remained, and with patience and tears tried to reconstruct things, insofar as they could be reconstructed. But the danger which their beloved little ones had been through was not a thing to risk again. Heaven had warned them. The children must go. This is basically a story following a group of children who are living out their youth at the very end of the 20th century in Jamaica. Emancipation just happened, and we're kind of thrust into this world, just a really turning point of the way people live. There are all of these rotting, decaying plantations that have been left with no one to man them. Life is very carefree for these children, and they're very kind of blind and unaware of their circumstances and kind of what's going on in the world. What this book is about at its core is, do you guys know that moment, those little like existential nights / moments that you have when you are like looking in a mirror and you become very aware of yourself, kind of like an out-of-body experience, but not really, just like kind of like hyper awareness of the fact that you're a person and you're on planet Earth and it's 10:51 p.m. on a Monday night and you're looking in your bathroom mirror in whatever town or country or city that you're in. This book essentially is about the first time that happens to a person, and it's all about that transition between childhood to adulthood, which I personally think is just a fascinating topic exploration. And I feel like there's a lot of books that explore like childhood and adulthood, but what I really think is cool about what Richard Hughes did or was doing in this book is that he was exploring the extremely fine line where that transition happens, like the exact moment that it happens. And there's actually a scene in here where the main character, or like one of the preliminary characters, he narrates that exact moment where she's kind of realizing that she is a person in relation to other people and she's not just herself walking and bumbling around. Specifically in the beginning of the book, when we're really just jumping into this like Jamaican jungle heat, and I felt like my skin was sticky just by reading his like really like beautiful description of this landscape, and did such a good job of creating such a palpable vibe of like where we're entering this world. I've always enjoyed books with children as main characters about, as cliche as it sounds, the loss of innocence and kind of this sincere casualty that comes with blind living as a child. This type of living that is sometimes cruel because of the unawareness that we have as children. It was really good, and I recommend you read A High Wind in Jamaica by Richard Hughes. All right, guys, moving up the ladder, my number 9 pick of the year, kind of a random one, at least random for me, but it goes to I Am the Cheese by Richard Cormier. Now one of them gets up and walks towards me. He's about 16 or 17, and he has freckles and straight white teeth, and he looks like a million other kids his age, except for that subtle difference that marks him for what he is. This one was just kind of like a haphazard pickup for me. I thought the title was interesting. Half of it is him frantically riding a bike. There's surprisingly beautiful bike riding imagery. Like the scenes where this character is riding, sometimes it made me want to get on a bike. We're so unsure of the circumstances that surround this kind of really drastic drop in. We're not sure if he's chasing something, if he's running from something. His life is obviously really full of strife. We know that he's in a hurry. There seems to be a lot of obstacles that keep presenting themselves to him. And then interspersed this telling of the story, we know this kid is trying to get towards his father. Interspersed between these timelines and a couple flashbacks, we have these really interesting psychiatric interviews that are taking place with the main character. And we're unsure if this is before or after the events that are being told. There's just a lot of mystery going into this book. It's definitely a book that I recommend you go into kind of blindly and just like succumb to it. There's a really kind of shocking twist at the end I was not expecting. It was surprising and made for an interesting reading experience, but that's not really the reason that I loved this book so much. It had to do less with the actual plot of the book, which once again is totally interesting, trying to figure out what's happened to this kid and why he is trying to get to his father and why he's not with his father to begin with, why the world seems to be against him. That is definitely its own pull into reading this book. For me, it had a lot to do with the voice of the protagonist and the narration that the main character Adam had. The way I describe it is just had this really easy sincerity about him. I was so invested in his story, not even for all the drama that was surrounding it, but for who he was as a person and my like genuine desire to see this kid succeed in his life and to get to where he needs to go and to find what he needs to find. And it kind of left me kind of shocked at the end. There was just a very specific reading vibe that I got from this that I just couldn't ignore. It's just kind of like this little hidden gem from the 70s that is a super quick read with such a kind of root forable protagonist that I really, really liked. And this was like a sad little book that I recommend to you guys. Yeah, that's I Am the Cheese. Okay, the next book that I have on my list for my number 8 pick of 2023 goes to Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. Andrews nodded. He looked at Charlie Hodge and beyond him. He was drowsy with the heat and the warm effects of the whiskey that he had drunk. In his mind were fragments of Miller's talk about the mountain country to which they were going, and those fragments glittered and turned and fell softly into accidental and strange patterns. Like the loose stained bits of glass in a kaleidoscope, they augmented themselves with their turning and found light from irrelevant and accidental sources. This is the story of a young man, really early 20s, who drops out of a prestigious school, I think it's Harvard, to find his way out into the Wild West. It's this little town called Butcher's Crossing, and he is there in search of something. He's in search of this lost part of himself, this key to life that he believes is found in nature. So he drops the life that he knows, the life that has been pressed upon him, the life that is traditional, to kind of go on this grand adventure in which he is convinced he will unlock the secrets to life's questions. This book is relatable in the sense that we have this bright-eyed, optimistic protagonist who is kind of naive about life and ready for the next thing. I feel like we've all had that moment, this kind of bright-eyed naivete that he is so ready to conquer the world with. He finds a group of ragtag, characters who get together for a buffalo hunt. We kind of see the transformation of this character into something completely different than he starts the novel off being. This book was brutal at some points. Really beautiful imagery. I feel like I say the word beautiful a lot, but it's because it's the word beautiful. So, but like I said, this book can be kind of really brutal at some points. There's so many things that are explored in this book. It's really kind of quintessential man's search for meaning. And then it kind of turns into man versus nature, man versus self kind of narrative. And also a little bit of the exploration of kind of the budding mass consumerism of the late 19th century. Buffalo were almost hunted to extinction. I've always really liked buffalo. I have it on my bookshelf. I will do a bookshelf tour at some point in my life, but is this a buffalo? Or is it a bison? Is there a difference between buffalo and bison? Sometimes it's almost even hard to read at some points, just the kind of bloodshed that was going on. This book ends on a note which, I don't want to say too much without spoiling it, but I feel like it's more optimistic than the average person might initially think that this book ends on, the note that it ends on, but it comforted me in a super weird way. And if anyone has read Butcher's Crossing and knows like the plot and the ending, maybe we can talk about that on a 1v1 level. But yeah, this was highly recommended. Butcher's Crossing, John Williams. Give it a shot. My number 7 pick of 2023 goes to this weird little book, The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard. Apart from the few older men such as Bodkin, there was no one who remembered living in them. And even during Bodkin's childhood, the cities had been beleaguered citadels, hemmed in by enormous dikes and disintegrated by panic and despair, reluctant Venices to their marriage with the sea. Their charm and beauty lay precisely in their emptiness, in the strange junction of two extremes of nature, like a discarded crown overgrown by wild orchids. Here we have this interesting post-apocalyptic tale where radiation has melted the ice cap, sending the world into a new Triassic age of extreme heat. We're following a group of scientists who are trying to stop it / study what's going on, and also kind of simultaneously coming to terms with the fact that everyone's probably gonna die. This book was really a wild ride. I think what I liked about this book so much was it had such a bizarre energy. The setting was super weird. We're in this kind of water world, swamplandia setting with just amazing imagery. It just feels so different from, I feel like, a lot of sci-fi that I've read. There are these kind of nautical-esque apocalyptic pirates who are diving to these like underwater museums to like steal these ancient artifacts and pieces of art and jewels. They've also trained alligators. This book is about what people do or how people react and act in the face of imminent death. This book is about succumbing to delusion. One thing that I really liked about this book that's just kind of hard for me to explain because it feels like a very personal connection that I have with this book. The reason I like this book so much is not the reason I think Ballard wrote it. Ballard might have wrote this as a cautionary tale, an exploration of how we view death. For me, there are moments in this book where the main character is almost in this kind of hypnotic state of the effect that these swamps that he is now surrounded with, all these underwater cities, are having on him. There's some parts where he's so far into delusion where he almost doesn't know what's reality and what's not. And something about that was really comforting to me. I think this is a discussion I would have to kind of break down deeper 1v1 with somebody about why this was comforting to me. But the best way I can kind of describe it is this kind of gave voice to a side of myself, and maybe I think a side or a part of everybody that wants to let go and give in and succumb to the swamp of life. And that's not a part of myself that I can afford to let rule, or at the very end of the day want to give power to. But there was something about being able to watch somebody else do it that was therapeutic to me. I feel like I sound a little bit crazy. I feel like I sound a little bit off. I think there's more to this than I'm really kind of prepared to express right now, because I think the thoughts are still forming. The ending of this book gave me chills. I remember the moment that I finished reading it. I remember where I was sitting, what position my body was in, and the chills just went over my body. I thought it was a great read. The only other thing kind of I would say about this book is that this is 60s sci-fi written by a white male, and the woman in this book is just a little bit off the wall, in a bikini and a full face of makeup half the time, which she explicitly says. So it's, what are women doing in the face of the apocalypse? Shaving their body head to toe and putting on red lipstick, just in case you wanted to know. My number 6 pick of the year goes to Census by Jessie Ball. Mutter writes of this when she writes, "The impression of dusk that a cormorant feels is nothing like our human dusk. We who are masters of nothing, who must change things in order to dominate them, cannot understand what it is like to be naturally a master, to obtain a sovereignty that does not grasp, but extends in somehow palpable lines from the edges of every feather, from the point of the beak, the globes of the eyes. For us, we must diminish those beasts, those cows, those goats that we would lead. We must break the brain of the horse that we would ride, so that we can crow that it lets us ride him. But anything changed becomes artifice, becomes less than what it was, when it is made to suit the human hand. Our human victories, by their nature, have no glory." Census is a book that I kind of can't talk about for long periods of time without becoming a little bit weepy and emotional. This book's weird. Basically, we are following a protagonist and his son. It is about a man who gets a terminal diagnosis and decides to spend his last days taking up with a mysterious government bureau a job as a census taker and traveling across the country with his son who has Down syndrome. I read Jessie Ball last year. I read Somebody the Deafness and I didn't like it. I reviewed it and I said I kind of just didn't get it, and I didn't really like his writing style, which is very stark and utilitarian. Even in an interview I watched about him, he made a joke about critics saying that he doesn't know what an adjective is. I actually thought that Somebody the Deafness, by the way, was his first novel. And there's a definite, I think, improvement in prose for me in this one. I'm so glad that I gave Jessie Ball another try, because it's a book that I had to give in to it to enjoy. Like, just give into Jessie Ball's style, which is not my, usual preference. Give into his kind of vague storytelling, because this is a book that doesn't offer you a lot about the protagonist's world. It feels very post something. It definitely feels futuristic. The census is really bizarre and doesn't seem to be really organized in any certifiable way. So you kind of just end up getting these characters kind of going door to door and talking to whoever will let them at that specific moment. And you kind of get these, you know, interesting characters and these different conversations and these different moments that this man and his son who has Down syndrome are having with these people. You have to go into this book with an acceptance that you're not really going to fully understand the world that the protagonists live in, but still attempting to understand them as people. In that way, it feels very inwardly personal and small scale, while also feeling like this overlay of like alienness, and something about it is foreign to you because you don't really completely understand their circumstances. I think I left this book with such heightened emotion for many different reasons. I feel like the best books, sorry, I told you I can't talk about this book very long without getting weepy, and I'm literally feeling it. This book has some sort of like power over me. Sorry, let me give it a second. I feel like the best books and this can be done in many different ways, make you love people more. And that's what this book did for me. I feel like I went into the world after completing this book as somebody who loved people like just a little bit more. I do love people, period, but I gained something from this. I feel like I understand people with Down syndrome a little bit better and the people who occupy their lives. This book was so tender, but so brutal. Sorry, I cannot, like, I was crying when this ended, obviously. And it was once again one of those books where you just, like, the moment I finished it is like stamped in my life. And it's like, I know where I was and what I was thinking and how I felt, and I think I remember what I was wearing. It's also an absurdist novel. If the description doesn't already sound sort of absurdist, then I'm telling you now that it is. Sorry, I need to like wipe my tears. 1 second. I'm just using a shirt that I found on the ground because my room's a mess, but okay. Yeah, Jesse Ball is a little weird. He's a little weird, and we like a little weird here. So yeah, that was Senses by Jesse Ball. It's definitely an acquired taste, I would say. Maybe Jesse Ball in general is an author's an acquired taste, but it's something different. And if you're looking for something different, if you're looking to like, not even really challenge yourself, but just open yourself to something that's not, you know, super linear and super clear, but just kind of wrought with emotion and tenderness and brutality, then you should read Senses. Next book that is my number 5 pick of the year goes to a poetry collection, and it goes to The Weary Blues by Langston Hughes. My black one. Thou art not luminous, yet an altar of jewels, an altar of shimmering jewels would pale in the light of thy darkness, pale in the light of thy nightness. What is there to say about Langston Hughes? Just arguably one of the biggest voices of talent to emerge from the paradisiac explosion that was the Harlem Renaissance. I love it. For me, I had a special connection with this book. This is Langston Hughes' first poetry collection that he ever published. And my special connection was that he published it when he was 24 years old. And guys, guess who's also 24? That would be me. So I felt this, I don't know, interesting sensation that we're both in the same moment of time in our little timeline as each other that I'm reading this book at. So I felt some sort of camaraderie because of that. Maybe is it kind of a little bit shallow to say that, and a little bit superficial maybe, but just let me do what I want to do. What I love about Langston Hughes is that he embodies so much. He embodies joy, love, anger, passion, rage, romance, and adventure just all bubbling forth in his mind and his body and his soul. And he is so good at expressing each facet of all of that. He had a sadness in him, but he had this lust for life in him, like that was eye to eye. I just feel like they don't make him like Langston Hughes anymore. I just feel like he was born to be a poet. I can just see him. I feel like I see him in his day-to-day life, and he like has a pencil behind his ear, paper pad in his pocket, that he's just ready to jot down something that grabs his attention at any moment. He feels like such a poet to me, if you know what I'm saying. He just possessed this willingness to succumb to life and take it for what it was, but at the same time like standing up and fighting it and wrestling with it. One thing I do want to mention about Langston Hughes is I feel like when people hear Langston Hughes, you obviously think like African-American writer, you think Harlem Renaissance, but he's not a writer who is exclusive to the Black experience. And I just want to put that out there because I want everybody to read him, not just like Black people, which, you know, he obviously has, you know, some biting moments that might resonate with a Black person more than anybody else. But at the end of the day, he's like a humanist, right? And he is a storyteller, and he embodies like the human experience and not just one singular moment in time, even though that's where he was coming from. For me, it's just such an essential, beautiful collection of poems that will take a lot for me to forget. I loved the feeling that you get from this book, which is that obviously you're reading the work of someone who was extremely talented, but also reading the work of someone who's extremely young. Yeah, everybody, The Weary Blues by Langston Hughes, so good, so choice. I highly recommend it. All right, my number 4 pick of the year, guys, we're getting up there, goes to, probably not a surprise to anyone, but Middlemarch by George Eliot. Many souls in their young nudity are tumbled out among incongruities and left to find their feet among them. Some discouragement, some faintness of the heart at the new, real future which replaces the imaginary is not unusual, and we do not expect people to be deeply moved by what is not unusual. That element of tragedy which lies in the very fact of frequency has not yet wrought itself into the course of emotion of mankind, and perhaps our frames could hardly bear much of it. If we had a keen vision and a feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heartbeat, and we should die of that roar which lies on the other side of silence. George Eliot, everyone. Get on your hands and knees. I miss the person that I was while I was reading Middlemarch. I felt like it's such a distinct moment in my life. It was kind of towards the beginning of the year, and I spent so many hours sitting in this little room just living in this world. This is another one of those beauty of the everyday life type of thing that I'm super attracted to. It's just this masterclass of the macro lens on everyday living that I don't know has been done again on the scale that George Eliot accomplished. It bring me feeling closer to people just in general. It felt very feminist in a way that like reaches towards neutrality. I meant just the fact that she wrote it under like a male pseudonym is interesting. What George Eliot is really good at is sitting with moments that you would usually let pass on by. And she makes you stop, and she makes you sit, and she makes you think, and she breaks it down for you. And it makes for just these, oh my God, just pagely mini renaissances, these pagely mini revelations that I felt at every turn, because this girl would just, she kept it going on this level that was so brilliant. And so that every page, I feel like I was like, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. And then I'd keep reading, and the next page I'd be like, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. Or, oh my gosh, I just love how she broke that down. This is a book that, you know, the tagline is a study in provincial life that mostly consists of people's everyday problems and passions, and has a lot of dialogue and a lot of walking into people's houses and having conversations and then thinking about those conversations and then doing it all again the next day. It has a lot of that, and that is what makes it so good. It really made you feel like you deeply knew and understood these characters who are, you know, physically nothing but marks of ink on a page. It's a long book. I feel like it's a book that you could read over a period of time. The message behind this book is so simple. It almost makes you wonder how it constitutes being told through this 800-page tome. But George Eliot kind of makes it abundantly clear that that was the best way to give forth this message that she wanted to. If it's not something that you feel like you want to devote that much time to, because it is big, like I said in my review of this originally, recommend just reading the prologue and the epilogue, because even though there's going to be a couple things that might not make sense, I feel like she does such a beautiful job of kind of conveying what she wanted to tell the world, what George Eliot wanted to tell the world through this beautiful book. And that is that, in the grand scheme of things, what Middlemarch is. And that is a defense of ordinariness, a case for the everyday man, and for small kindnesses, for understanding how truly big and important everybody's life is, no matter how small you think it is. It seems like such a basic message, but even if you think you understand that already, I promise you, George will make you realize that you didn't. All right, guys, number 3 pick for 2023 goes to Stoner by John Williams. Yes, I have an author appearing twice on this list. I'm just as shocked as you are. Nor do you escape, my friend. No, indeed. Who are you? A simple son of the soil, as you pretend to yourself? Oh no. You too are among the infirm. You are the dreamer, the madman in the madder world. Our own Midwestern Don Quixote without his Sancho, gambling under the blue sky. Brighter anyhow than our mutual friend, but you have the taint, the old infirmity. You think there's something here, something to find. Well, in the world you'd soon learn enough. You too are cut out for failure. Not that you'd fight the world, you'd let it chew you up and spit you out. And you'd always lie there wondering what was wrong. And you'd always expect the world to be something it wasn't, something it had no wish to be. The weevil in the cotton, the worm in the beanstalk, the borer in the corn. You couldn't face them, and you couldn't fight them, because you're too weak and you're too strong. I feel like this book has been making the rounds, and for good reason. This book is it's great. This book is very simple on paper. It's about a man who grows up kind of poor on a farm, goes to university, ends up becoming a teacher, gets married, has a child, and lives his life. And very clear cut, kind of doesn't seem like there's a lot of substance there. But whew, if John Williams doesn't just give you something to chew on. This book has its own little cult following, which I'm glad to have joined. And it's kind of hard to explain why it has a little bit of a cult following, especially if you just kind of read the back of the book and you're like, oh, okay, that's what all the hype's about. You just gotta read it. You gotta dive in, you gotta read it. This book is about a man who is kind of forgettable. The book starts off with saying that somebody has died, that the main character has died. It's not a spoiler, literally first page, first couple sentences. And that not many people really remember him. Not many people are going to remember him, especially in a couple years that he kind of lived his life and is slowly dropping off into obscurity. There is such comfort in Stoner's inability to really outwardly portray his inner life, which is so rich, and you feel privileged to kind of get a look into through the narration of this novel. But it's made very abundantly clear that this kind of inside look that you're getting, which is the portrait of a really tender, emotional, passionate, and kind, I think, man. But on the outward, he's kind of just not all that. He has this extreme passion for the written word, for writing, for literature, which he falls in love with when he ends up going to university. He's not that great of a teacher, and he falls in love with this girl, but his marriage doesn't really work out, which I think the whole kind of character study of him and his wife Edith, and it was probably one of the most kind of fascinating portraits of a marriage that I've personally read in literature. I feel like there's a lot to analyze there, and I was super invested and interested in their relationship. Just a heads up. Something about this book is so magical, just getting to look into this man's life and seeing how he interacts with his friends and his failures and the bitterness that he sometimes has and the compassion he feels, his love of the written word. I feel like maybe this book is a little bit of a slightly, has a leg up among readers because Stoner as a character is very in love with literature. Stoner's love of literature specifically is very like erudite, and it just brings to mind this one scene with this student, and the whole scene kind of went straight over my head in terms of like how they discuss literature, but at the same time it didn't even feel pretentious because you know that the main character is so sincere about it. The last probably third of the book really took me for a loop. I mean, the last couple pages of this literally haunt me. It haunts me in its scope. It haunts me in its tone. It haunts me in the things that this man is bringing up and thinking about before he dies. Like, it's just something you have to read. It's so ordinary, and you guys know I love ordinary. Finished it sobbing, loved it. I love it. I love Stoner. But this is my number 2 pick of the year, and that goes to Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Gaston. He seized his heart in his 2 hands to make it stop. The man's voice spoke again. Are you very tired? Oh, tonight I gave you my soul and I'm dead. Your soul is a beautiful thing, child, replied the man's grave voice, and I thank you. No emperor ever received so fair a gift. The angels wept tonight. It's Phantom of the Opera, y'all. This book was so good. At its core, Phantom of the Opera is a story about ugliness, unrequited love, obsession, all of our innate desire to belong to something or someone. It is a gothic tale of the Parisian opera house. This is a book that was so dramatic, and I loved it for that. One thing I really want to make clear about this book is the monologues. The monologues were amazing. They were almost pure poetry no matter what the subject was, whether it was a confession of love or an outburst of anger or thinking out loud to yourself, or all 3 put in one. This felt so deliciously dramatic and gothic, and I felt like I was just along for the ride. It felt so really fully immersive. It was a love story that I was so genuinely invested in. I'm not a romance reader, but this can be so, among other things, categorized as a romance. And as someone who doesn't read romance, especially I think modern romance is a little bit like, I don't know if it's really my cup of tea, but this felt I felt so invested in this love story, and I felt so much belief in the love between all 3 of the people who are kind of involved in this love triangle, if that's what you want to call it. And I was genuinely hoping for happiness and for people to succeed in their passions. I loved the whole systems of like lakes and tunnels that is under this opera house. It felt just so fantastical. And this energy that he holds over the patrons of this opera house is so palpable. The story is unique, it's poetic, it's sad, it feels really high stakes, and at some points it's just completely outrageous, and I loved it so much. I think this story is mostly known This story is mostly known and I think recognized through the movies, but y'all need to give a little bit of credit to the original source material, which is this amazing novel, and you need to read it. Okay guys, and last but not least, I think my favorite book of the year goes to, this might surprise some people, but The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Shocking, I know, just hear me out. He got out, oh my god, He got out a sapphire mark for light, avoiding pools of water strewn with bones. A skull protruded from one, wavy green moss growing across the scalp like hair, lifespan bobbing above. Perhaps it should have felt eerie to walk through these darkened slots alone, but they didn't bother Kaladin. This was a sacred place. The sepulchre of the lowly, the burial cavern of bridgemen and spearmen who died by light-eyed edict, spilling blood down the sides of these ragged walls. This place wasn't eerie, it was holy. There's this moment that I have, probably one of my favorite moments of the entire year. While I was driving back on this little mini road trip from California, and I was driving, it was like nighttime, like pitch black, like put on your brights kind of night, and my sister was beside me, but she had gone to sleep, and I put on the audiobook for this just to like listen to while I drove back home. It was at such an awesome point in the book, which was so high stakes, and I just remember loving that drive like no other. Just the way it felt, the emptiness that was surrounding me, my sister asleep next to me, the audio playing, and me being so invested, like gripping the steering wheel, just hoping and praying that what I wanted was going to happen and that this certain character would succeed. And it was literally euphoric to me. And why I loved this book so much is I feel like it was a book that I needed this year, especially after, you know, my mom dying, and I feel like it was just such a perfect escape into this fantasy realm that was so well done. We're following kind of the threads of the story thread of three different people. We have like an assassin, a ward to a king's sister, a disgraced warrior who's now a slave, and a high prince of Roshar. It is such this felt classic to me in the way that it was felt so heroes versus villains. I feel like so many books today rely on this kind of morally ambiguous character development, which I love. I think it's great. I think that it's needed. I love that. And while the characters in this are not flat or one-sided or like foils in any way, it felt so good to just go into a book feeling like I knew who I was rooting for and who I hated, and it felt really classic in that way, but told in an environment that felt new, a story that didn't feel recycled. It just reminds me of like why I read and why reading and storytelling is so powerful. It felt like such a feat of the imagination. I feel like this is, you know, outside of these amazing lessons that we learn from writing and reading, this is like the height of creativity, like just an homage to what your mind can do if you just want to create a fantastical world. And I just enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed it for that aspect, the escapism that I felt while reading it. It just felt like such a good read for me. It just felt like when I looked back at all the books that I read this year, this is the one that I remember the most like joy and like investment. It's really long and there's like a whole bunch of other books in this series, so I'm super excited to continue it. It was just the one that I look back with that I felt like I had the most like fun reading, and I think I needed fun this year. Even though a lot of the books I read weren't really fun, it's what I needed and what I craved this year. So yeah, for me, it was just my top reading experience of the year. I will say Brandon Sanderson's prose is nothing to write home about. It's nothing special. the bulk of the story for me was in the characterization and in the stories, but he did have these moments where a character would like make a speech. There's this one moment, like I literally have memorized some of the speeches. One of the characters makes this like amazing speech, and he definitely has these standout moments where I'm like, wow, that was really beautiful. Though it's not like prose that is like absolutely, you know, crazy poetic or anything like that. It was just really, I think it really held its own and really worked for the kind of story that he was telling. And yeah, I really loved it. So guys, that's it. That's it. That was it. I hope to put out, I don't, you know, I'm just like with all these platitudes and yada yada yada. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the flip side. And as always, happy reading, losers.